A little black girl calls the wrong emergency number when her mother fainted. A few minutes later, a billionaire appears at the door in a black SUV. Hi, my beautiful family. Thank you for sticking around with me through our trying times. I really appreciate your love and support. We're finally back again to give you many more beautiful stories. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The world went sideways for a second, and the first thing Lena James thought was, not now. Please, not in front of her. From the corner of her eye, she could see her daughter, Maya, sitting at their wobbly kitchen table. The 7-year-old was humming, a crayon clutched in her small fist, completely absorbed in her art. The scent of cinnamon filled the air, but it was tainted with the acrid smell of toast just beginning to burn. Lena couldn't bring herself to move. She gripped the edge of the kitchen sink, her knuckles white, praying the floor would stop tilting on its greasy axis. This was the 3rd time this week. The dizzy spells came like thieves, stealing her balance and her breath, leaving a cold sweat in their wake. Exhaustion, she told herself. Just the bone-deep weariness of working 2 jobs, of sleeping in 4-hour shifts, of being the only thing standing between her child and a world that wasn't kind to those who stumbled. Mama? Maya's small voice cut through the ringing in Lena's ears. Is the sun supposed to have a sad face? Lena forced herself to turn, pasting on a smile that felt like cracking porcelain. She looked at the drawing. It was a lopsided orange sun, and its mouth was a perfect, downturned arc. A child's intuition was a powerful thing. Maya was drawing what she felt radiating from her mother. "No, sweet pea," Lena managed, her voice sounding thin and distant. "He's just tired from shining so bright." It was a lie. Lena was the one who was tired. Tired of being strong, tired of pretending that the burnt toast was just a mistake and not a sign that she was losing her grip. The scent of cinnamon and char wasn't the smell of Mama is trying her best anymore. It was the smell of fear. And as the edges of her vision began to darken, a terrifying certainty washed over her. This time, she wasn't just stumbling. This time, she was going to fall. Her mother, Lena, stood with her back to her, her shoulders slumped over the sink. The faucet dripped with a rhythmic plink, plink, plink that usually annoyed Maya, but today it was just part of the quiet. Lena hadn't said much all morning. She'd hummed a little, a low, tired sound, as she braided Maya's hair, her fingers moving with a practiced slowness that felt different from their usual nimble dance. "Mama?" Maya asked, her voice small. "Is the sun sad today?" Lena turned, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her beautiful face, usually so full of light, was drawn and pale beneath her rich, dark skin. There were faint, bluish shadows under her eyes, like smudges of twilight. "No, sweet pea," she said, her voice raspy. She cleared her throat. "The sun is just tired. He was up all night shining for the people on the other side of the world." She came over and kissed the top of Maya's head, her lips cool. Just like Mama. Lena worked 2 jobs. One was cleaning offices downtown, a world of gleaming glass and empty boardrooms she'd described to Maya in hushed, wondrous tones. The other was at a 24-hour diner, where she refilled coffee cups for truckers and students and anyone else awake in the lonely hours of the night. Sleep was a luxury she rationed like sugar. For the past week, a new kind of tiredness had settled into her bones. It wasn't just the ache of long hours on her feet. It was a dizzying fatigue that would rise up without warning, making the room tilt and sway. She'd grip the edge of a counter, her knuckles white, and breathe through it until the world settled back onto its axis. She'd told herself it was just exhaustion. It had to be. A doctor was a cost she couldn't afford, a day off an impossibility. Her life was a carefully constructed tower of cards. One gust of wind, one unexpected expense, and the whole thing would come tumbling down. Maya was her foundation, the one solid thing that held it all up. She couldn't afford to be sick. She couldn't afford to be anything but strong. "You finished your drawing, baby?" Lena asked, her hand lingering on Maya's shoulder. Maya held it up. "He needs a friend." She picked up a blue crayon and started drawing a small, smiling cloud next to the frowning sun. Lena's smile this time was real, a flicker of the brilliant light Maya was used to. You always know how to fix things, don't you? That was their dynamic. Lena was the rock, the provider, the fierce protector. Maya was the light, the fixer of sad suns, the reason for it all. Their two-bedroom apartment, with its mismatched furniture and second-hand books, was a fortress of love against a world that was often cold and indifferent. Every crayon drawing taped to the peeling paint of the walls was a testament to their quiet defiance. "We are here," they said. "We have each other." Lena walked back toward the counter, her hand pressed to her temple. The room was starting to swim again. The edges of her vision were fuzzy, like looking through frosted glass. "Just breathe," she told herself. "Just a minute more." 200 miles away, in a house that wasn't a home but a monument to emptiness, Julian Croft stood before a floor-to-ceiling window. The view was of a meticulously manicured garden, a sterile expanse of green where every blade of grass stood at perfect attention. Not a single wild flower or weed dared to disrupt the order. It was, like everything else in his life, controlled, precise, and devoid of joy. He was dressed in a gray suit that cost more than Lena's rent for a year, but he wore it with the same indifference as a uniform. At 42, Julian had the kind of wealth that was spoken of in financial journals, with a mixture of awe and fear. He didn't just own companies, he consumed them. His mind was a machine, a calculator that saw the world in assets, liabilities, and strategic acquisitions. But the machine was housed in a hollow shell. His house echoed. It echoed with the silence of a life unlived, of laughter that had died 5 years ago on a rain-slicked highway. He never spoke of them, of Amelia, his wife, whose laughter had been like wind chimes, or of Lily, his daughter, whose crayon drawings had once covered the walls of a house that was now bare. After the accident, he had stripped the house of their presence, thinking that erasing the memories would erase the pain. It hadn't. It had only created a vacuum, a black hole of grief that had swallowed him whole. His routine was his armor. 6 a.m., workout. 7 a.m., financial reports. 8 a.m., drive to the office. His days were a series of calculated moves, his nights a return to the echoing silence. He hadn't had a meal with another person in his own home in years. His housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, would leave his food in a warming tray, a silent, ghostly offering. He took a sip of his black coffee. It was bitter, just how he liked it. Anything else felt like a betrayal of the bitterness in his own soul. His phone buzzed on the granite countertop, and he glanced at it. A notification from his security chief. Asset acquisition complete. Tier 4 integration to commence Monday. He felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pride, just the dull thud of another task completed. It's a strange thing to have everything and feel nothing. Sometimes, in the dead of night, he would wonder what the point of it all was. Acquiring, building, winning. It felt like a game where the scoreboard was the only thing that mattered, yet he'd long forgotten why he was playing. People who met him saw a titan of industry, a modern-day Midas. They didn't see the man who sometimes stood in the doorway of a dark, empty room that used to be a nursery, unable to breathe. Have you ever felt a deep sense of loneliness, even when surrounded by the trappings of success or a busy life? It's a powerful reminder that what we often chase isn't what our hearts truly need. Share a thought in the comments about what you believe truly cures loneliness. Back in the apartment, Lena's breath hitched. The fuzzy edges of her vision were closing in, a tunnel of darkness. The plink, plink, plink of the faucet grew louder, echoing in her ears like a drumbeat. "Mama?" Maya's voice sounded very far away. Lena tried to answer, but her tongue felt thick and heavy in her mouth. She reached out a hand, trying to steady herself on the back of a chair, but her fingers found only air. A cold wave washed over her, starting at her toes and rushing up to her head. The floor seemed to rush up to meet her. There was a soft, dull thud. Maya looked up from her drawing. The blue cloud now had a family of little raindrop children. "Mama, look!" She stopped. Her mother was on the floor. She was lying on her side, her cheek pressed against the worn linoleum. Her eyes were closed. She wasn't moving. "Mama?" Silence. The only sounds were the dripping faucet and the frantic thumping of Maya's own heart. "Mama, wake up!" Maya slid off her chair and crept closer. She poked her mother's shoulder. It was warm but unresponsive. "Mama, it's not funny." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her. This was wrong. This was very, very wrong. Mama always woke up. She shook her again, harder this time. "Mama!" Nothing. Lena's face was slack, peaceful in a way that was terrifying. Tears welled in Maya's eyes, hot and fast. She knew about emergencies. Mama had taught her. You call the numbers on the fridge. 911, the big red magnet numbers. But her eyes darted to the refrigerator and saw only her own drawings, held up by silly magnets shaped like fruits. The 911 magnet had fallen off last week, lost somewhere in the clutter. Her mind raced, a frantic search for a solution. Then she remembered. The old phone, the one Mama kept in a drawer with spare keys and rubber bands. It didn't work anymore, she'd said, but Maya sometimes played with it. And on the back of that phone there was a sticker, a fancy silver sticker with a phone number on it. Mama had once told her, a long time ago, in a story-time voice, "This was from a job I had before you were born." They were people who could help with anything, day or night. People who could help with anything. Her hands trembling, Maya scrambled to the junk drawer, pulling it open with a clatter. There it was, an old, heavy black phone. She turned it over. The silver sticker was peeling at the edges, the numbers slightly faded, but they were there. It wasn't 911, it was a different number, a longer number. With her mother lying silent on the floor, the world shrinking to the size of her own terror, Maya clutched the phone. Her small fingers, clumsy with fear, began to press the numbers one by one. The number was a ghost. It belonged to the Croft Concierge, a hyper-exclusive, invitation-only service Julian had founded in his 30s. It was a whim, a toy for the ultra-rich, promising to deliver anything from a rare orchid at 3 a.m. to a private jet on 10 minutes' notice. The tagline had been, "Consider it done." He'd sold the company years ago, but for some arcane legal reason connected to the original holding company, the master number, the very first one ever assigned, had never been fully decommissioned. Instead, it was locked in a digital vault, and in a fit of nostalgia he'd long since forgotten, he'd ordered all calls to that specific line permanently rerouted to his personal, unlisted mobile number. It hadn't rung in over a decade. Until now. Julian glanced at the screen, a frown creasing his brow. An unknown number. Impossible. His personal line was a digital fortress. Not even his board of directors had this number. His assistant, Evelyn, a woman with the disposition of a hawk and the efficiency of a supercomputer, filtered everything. This was a breach, an annoyance. He was about to decline it when a strange impulse made him swipe to answer. "Croft," he said, his voice clipped and cold, the single word a dismissal in itself. For a moment there was only static, a faint hissing sound like a distant ocean.
He was about to hang up, irritated at the intrusion, when a sound came through. It was tiny, fragile, a breath more than a word. "Hello?" It was the voice of a child. Julian's posture straightened slightly. A wrong number, clearly, a very strange one. "You have the wrong number," he stated, preparing to disconnect. "Please," the voice came again, cracking with a desperate sob that cut through the static like a shard of glass. "Please, help me." Something in the tone, the raw, unvarnished terror, stopped him. It bypassed the executive, the titan, the machine, and hit something dormant and deeply buried. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice losing a fraction of its icy edge. My mommy." The voice was a whisper, choked with tears. "She fell down. Her eyes are closed and she won't wake up." The world around Julian Croft tilted. The stock tickers scrolling on the screen behind his desk blurred into meaningless green and red lines. The meticulously ordered garden outside his window vanished. He was no longer in his sterile mansion. He was standing on cold linoleum, smelling burnt toast and cinnamon, the silence of the room screaming louder than any alarm. He saw Lily, his Lily, small and scared after falling off a swing, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her voice a tiny squeak. "Daddy, it hurts." The memory was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He hadn't allowed himself to think of her, to see her face in his mind's eye for 5 years. But this voice, this stranger's terrified plea, had picked the lock on the door he'd sealed shut. "Where are you?" he managed to ask, his own voice sounding foreign to him. I'm at home," the little girl whispered. "I don't know the address. Mama says never to tell strangers." A child, alone with an unconscious parent, programmed to be cautious even in her terror. The practicality of it was heartbreaking. "Okay," Julian said, his mind racing, kicking into a gear it hadn't used in years. Not the gear of acquisitions and hostile takeovers, but of pure, primitive problem-solving. "Listen to me. What's your name?" "Maya."
Okay, Maya, I want to help you. Can you describe what you see outside your window? He was already typing on his computer, pulling up satellite imagery, triangulation software. He could dispatch an ambulance, his personal security, a medical team. He could solve this problem with a few phone calls, the way he solved everything. "Trees," she said, "and Mr. Henderson's car. It's the blue one with the rusty door." It was useless. He was wasting time. "Maya, is there a name on the street sign? Can you go to the door and look?" He heard a soft sniffle, then the sound of small, shuffling feet. A pause. "It's too dark to see the sign," she said, her voice trembling, "and I'm not allowed to open the door." "Okay, that's okay." He had to keep her calm. He had to keep himself calm. The ghost of Lily was standing beside him now, her small hand slipping into his. He could almost feel it. "Do something, Daddy." His logical brain screamed at him, "Dispatch a team. Let the professionals handle it. This is not your problem." But Maya's next words shattered that logic completely. Are you coming?" she asked, a sliver of desperate hope in her voice. It wasn't a question for a dispatcher or an operator. It was a question for a person, for him. In that moment, Julian Croft made the first irrational decision of his adult life. He wasn't going to send a team. He wasn't going to delegate. The thought of this small, terrified child waiting alone, of a stranger in a uniform arriving, felt unbearable. He felt a primal, protective urge that he thought had died with his family. He had to go himself. He had to be the one to walk through that door. It was a penance, a prayer, a desperate attempt to outrun his own ghosts. "Yes, Maya," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "I'm coming. Can you tell me what number you called? Read it to me from the phone." Her small voice recited the numbers from the peeling silver sticker. Julian's blood ran cold. He recognized it instantly. The Croft Concierge.
A phantom from another life. A life where he believed he could fix anything. A life before he learned that the most important things were the most fragile, and that all the money in the world couldn't mend what was truly broken. Okay, Maya, I know where you are. The old service had a GPS locator embedded in its system for its high-end clientele. He had a vague memory of Lena, a bright, fiercely competent intern who had worked on the project's logistics team for a few months before disappearing to have a baby. The system, it seemed, still linked her old, registered address to that number. A digital breadcrumb left years ago. "Don't open the door for anyone but me," he instructed, his voice now firm, reassuring. "I'm in a big black car. Can you be brave for me for a few more minutes?" "I'll try," she whispered. He hung up, his hand trembling slightly. He stared at his own reflection in the dark screen of his phone. The face looking back was a stranger, a man with wide, haunted eyes. He didn't call his driver. He didn't call Evelyn. He strode past the silent waiting staff, grabbed the keys to his personal vehicle, a custom, all-black armored SUV that looked more like a military transport than a car, and walked out into the sterile morning air. The engine was silent, a low electric hum as he pulled out of his long, winding driveway. The gates slid open without a sound. He was leaving his fortress. The GPS on the dashboard displayed a map, a route leading him away from the manicured lawns and gated communities of his world, and into the heart of the city, into a neighborhood of cracked sidewalks, struggling businesses, and life lived on the edge. The 15-minute drive felt like an eternity. Each red light was an agony. The city morphed around him. Gleaming skyscrapers gave way to brick-faced apartment buildings, then to rows of houses with peeling paint and sagging porches. He was a ghost ship gliding through foreign waters, his silent black monolith of a vehicle drawing curious, disbelieving stares. He saw none of them. His focus was narrowed to a single point, a child's voice, a ghost from the past, and a desperate, inexplicable need to atone. He turned onto a street named Elmwood, a cheerful name for a block that had seen better days. He saw the blue car with the rusty door. He saw the building number, faded but legible. He pulled the SUV to a smooth halt at the curb. For a second, he just sat there, the quiet hum of the engine the only sound. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a wild, unfamiliar rhythm. He was afraid. Not of the neighborhood, not of the unknown situation behind the door. He was afraid of the feeling that was coursing through him, this raw, terrifying, blistering humanity. He got out of the car. The air here was thick with the smells of life, car exhaust, damp earth, the faint aroma of someone's cooking. It was overwhelming.
He walked up the cracked concrete path to the front door of apartment 2B. It was slightly ajar, just as he'd imagined. He pushed it open. The scene hit him with the force of a physical impact. The small, cluttered room. The scent of cinnamon. A woman lying motionless on the floor, her dark hair fanned out around her head like a halo. And standing over her, a tiny, trembling figure in a bright pink t-shirt. Her face a mess of tears, her dark eyes wide with a terror so profound it stole his breath. In her hand, she clutched an old, brick-like cell phone as if it were a holy relic. Their eyes met across the small space. The multi-billionaire, a man who commanded empires, and the 7-year-old girl who had just brought his entire world crashing down with a single, desperate phone call. The silence was broken by Maya's whisper, a sound so fragile he barely heard it. "You came." For a heartbeat, Julian was frozen. The child's simple, awe-filled statement, "You came," landed not as an accusation or a relief, but as a judgment. It was a verdict on a life he hadn't realized was on trial. He had spent 5 years running from connection, from responsibility, from anything that resembled the messy, unpredictable landscape of human emotion. Now he was standing in its epicenter. He shook off the paralysis.
The machine inside him, the one that assessed, analyzed, and acted, took over. He knelt beside Lena, his movements precise and economical. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, finding a pulse. It was thready, too fast, but it was there. Her skin was clammy. "Maya," he said, his voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the storm inside him. "I need you to be my helper. Can you do that?" Maya nodded, her eyes still wide, tracking his every move. The tears had stopped, replaced by a stunned, watchful silence. "I need you to go to your room and get your mama's favorite blanket. And then I need you to wait for me in there. I'm going to make a phone call, and then I'm going to take care of her. I promise." The word promise felt heavy on his tongue, a currency he hadn't traded in for years. Maya hesitated for a second, her gaze flicking from his face to her mother's still form. But something in his eyes, a flicker of that same desperate need he felt, must have registered with her. She gave a small, jerky nod, turned, and disappeared into a room down the short hallway. Julian pulled out his phone. He didn't call 911. An ambulance would mean a public spectacle, a city hospital, social workers, questions he couldn't answer, and a bureaucracy he had no patience for. It would mean losing control, and control was the only thing he had left. He scrolled to a number he hadn't dialed in years. Dr. Alastair Finch. A crisp, British voice answered on the first ring. Finch was a relic from his old life, a concierge doctor who had catered to his family, a man whose discretion was as legendary as his diagnostic skill. "Alastair, it's Julian Croft." There was a moment of surprised silence. "Julian, my God, it's been a long time." "I have a medical emergency. A woman, mid-30s, unconscious. Pulse is rapid and faint. Skin is cool and clammy. I need you now." He relayed the address, his tone leaving no room for questions. "I'm 20 minutes out," Alastair said, his voice all business now. "Don't move her. Is there any sign of trauma?" "Negative," Julian said, his eyes scanning the room. He saw the burnt toast, the lopsided crayon sun on the table. He saw a life of struggle, not violence. "I think it's exhaustion, maybe dehydration, but I'm not a doctor. Stay on the line with me, Julian." "No," he said, his voice sharp. "The child is here. I can't. Just get here." He hung up before Alastair could protest. He couldn't be on the phone, listening to medical jargon while a little girl waited in the next room. He walked to the hallway and saw Maya peeking out from her bedroom door, a brightly colored quilt clutched in her hands. "I got it," she whispered. He gently took it from her and draped it over Lena. Then he looked at Maya, truly looked at her. She was so small, so impossibly fragile, yet she was radiating a fierce protective energy. "You were very brave, Maya. Your mom would be very proud of you." He led her back into her room, a space that was a riot of color and imagination. Stars glowed on the ceiling, and stuffed animals were piled on the bed like a furry mountain range. He sat on the edge of her small bed, feeling like a giant in a dollhouse. "What's your name?" she asked, out of childish curiosity. "Julian," he said. "That's a big name," she decided. He almost smiled. "I suppose it is." The next 20 minutes were the longest of his life. He sat with Maya, asking her quiet questions about her drawings, about her favorite stuffed animal, a one-eyed bear named Bartholomew, listening as she spoke about her mother with a simple, profound adoration. "Mama makes the best pancakes," she said, "but she's always sleepy."
When he heard the discreet knock on the door, he told Maya to stay put and went to let Alastair in. Dr. Finch was a small, neat man with kind eyes and an air of unflappable competence. He took in the scene with a single, sweeping glance. Julian's tense posture, the woman on the floor, the crayon drawing on the table, and got straight to work. Lena began to stir as Alastair checked her vitals. Her eyelids fluttered open, her gaze unfocused and confused. She tried to sit up, a low moan escaping her lips. "Easy now, my dear," Alistair said gently. "You've had a bit of a fall." Lena's eyes finally focused, first on the strange man leaning over her, then on the towering figure of Julian Croft standing by the door. Fear, sharp and immediate, flooded her face. She pushed herself up, her movements clumsy. Who are you? Where's my daughter?" she demanded, her voice hoarse. "She's safe," Julian said, stepping forward. "She's in her room. You collapsed." Lena's mind was a fog, but the protective instinct was a lightning bolt. She scrambled to her feet, swaying dangerously. "Maya! Mama!" Maya came running out of the room, straight into Lena's arms. Lena hugged her fiercely, burying her face in her daughter's hair, drinking in the scent of her, assuring herself that she was real, that she was okay. Only then did she look back at Julian, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Who are you?" she repeated, her voice laced with steel. "And what are you doing in my home?" Dr. Finch answered for him. "My name is Dr. Finch, Miss." "James," Lena supplied, her arm a protective shield around Maya. "Lena James." "Miss James, your daughter called for help," Mr. Croft responded. Lena's gaze was a torrent of conflicting emotions, confusion, fear, and a deep, simmering anger. This man, in his ridiculously expensive suit, with his aura of power and privilege, didn't belong here. He was a disruption, a threat. People like him didn't just show up in places like this unless they wanted something. "Called who?" she asked, looking at Maya. Maya held up the old phone. "The number on the sticker, Mama, the one for the helpers." Recognition dawned on Lena's face, followed by a wave of mortification. The Croft concierge. A job from a lifetime ago, a number she hadn't thought about in almost a decade. She had called her former billionaire boss's long-dead private service. The absurdity, the sheer crushing humiliation of it made her dizzy all over again. "I'm sorry," she stammered, looking at Julian. "There's been a mistake. My daughter, she didn't know. We don't need anything. Thank you for coming. You can go now." Her pride was a fortress, the walls going up brick by painful brick. She was used to handling things on her own. She had survived an abusive ex, poverty, and soul-crushing exhaustion. She wouldn't be undone by a dizzy spell in front of a man who represented everything she wasn't. Julian saw the pride, the fear, the fierce independence. He was used to people who wanted something from him. He wasn't used to people who wanted him to leave. It was unsettling. He found himself resisting the urge to simply walk away, to write a check and consider the problem solved. "That's not a good idea, Miss James," Dr. Finch said, his tone gentle but firm. "You're severely dehydrated, and your blood pressure is dangerously low. You're suffering from extreme exhaustion. You need rest, complete, uninterrupted rest." "I'll rest when I can," Lena retorted, her chin held high. "I have to work." "If you continue at this pace, you'll end up in a hospital. Or worse," Alistair said bluntly. The words hung in the air, a stark and terrifying prophecy. Lena's armor cracked. The thought of being unable to care for Maya, of being truly incapacitated, was her deepest fear. Julian saw the crack. He saw the terror behind the pride. And he felt that same strange pull again. This wasn't a business transaction. It wasn't charity. It was something else. Something that felt dangerously close to responsibility. "I'll cover your shifts," he said, the words coming out before he could think them through. "I'll make sure your job is secure. I'll handle the medical expenses." It was the wrong thing to say. He knew it the moment he said it. He was trying to solve a human problem with money, and it was a language Lena James clearly resented. Her eyes flashed. "I don't want your money, Mr. Croft. I don't want anything from you. We were fine before you got here, and we'll be fine after you leave." It was a lie, and they both knew it. She was anything but fine. But her resistance was palpable, She was pushing him away with all her might, trying to shrink him back into a stranger, to erase the intimacy of the moment when he had answered her daughter's call. And Julian, to his own astonishment, found himself pushing back. He resisted the easy out. He resisted the urge to retreat to his sterile, controlled world. "That's not a good idea, Miss James," Dr. Finch said, his tone gentle but firm. "You're severely dehydrated, and your blood pressure is dangerously low. You're suffering from extreme exhaustion. You need rest, complete, uninterrupted rest." "I'll rest when I can," Lena retorted, her chin held high. "I have to work." "If you continue at this pace, you'll end up in a hospital." "Or worse," Alistair said bluntly. The words hung in the air, a stark and terrifying prophecy. Lena's armor cracked. The thought of being unable to care for Maya, of being truly incapacitated, was her deepest fear. Julian saw the crack. He saw the terror behind the pride. And he felt that same strange pull again. This wasn't a business transaction. It wasn't charity. It was something else. Something that felt dangerously close to responsibility. "I'll cover your shifts," he said, the words coming out before he could think them through. "I'll make sure your job is secure. I'll handle the medical expenses." It was the wrong thing to say. He knew it the moment he said it. He was trying to solve a human problem with money, and it was a language Lena James clearly resented. Her eyes flashed. "I don't want your money, Mr. Croft. I don't want anything from you. We were fine before you got here, and we'll be fine after you leave." It was a lie, and they both knew it. She was anything but fine. But her resistance was palpable. She was pushing him away with all her might, trying to shrink him back into a stranger, to erase the intimacy of the moment when he had answered her daughter's call. And Julian, to his own astonishment, found himself pushing back. He resisted the easy out. He resisted the urge to retreat to his sterile, controlled world. He saw the faint tremor in her hands as she held Maya, the exhaustion etched so deeply into her face. He saw Maya looking between the two adults, her small face a canvas of confusion and fear. "This isn't about money, Miss James," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "This is about your daughter. She needs her mother to be healthy." He had aimed for her heart, and he had hit his mark. Lena's defiant expression wavered, her resolve crumbling under the weight of her love for Maya. But the suspicion remained. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" It was the question he had been asking himself since he'd answered the phone. Why had he come? Why was he staying? He didn't have an answer, not one he could articulate anyway. So he gave her the only piece of truth he could grasp. "Because a little girl asked for help," he said simply, "and I was the one who answered." The room fell silent, the air thick with the unspoken tension between them. Lena, proud and cornered, resisting the help she desperately needed. Julian, detached and powerful, resisting the urge to flee from a situation that was becoming more complicated by the second. And between them, a 7-year-old girl, the fragile, trusting bridge over a chasm of fear and mistrust. The standoff hung in the small apartment, as thick and heavy as the humid air. Lena's pride was a tangible thing, a shield she held up against Julian's quiet insistence. But it was a shield full of cracks, and Dr. Finch was about to hammer another one into it. "Miss James," the doctor said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "I'm not making a suggestion. I'm giving you a medical directive. You need, at minimum, 1 week of complete bed rest. No work, no stress. You need proper nutrition and hydration. If you ignore me, you risk another episode, one that could have far more serious consequences. Your heart is under significant strain." Every word was a nail in the coffin of Lena's independence. A week?
A week off work meant no paycheck. It meant falling behind on rent. It meant the carefully constructed tower of her life would not just wobble, it would collapse. She looked around her small apartment, at the peeling paint and the wobbly table. This was her sanctuary, the world she had built for Maya. But it was also a cage of obligations. Stress wasn't a choice, it was the air she breathed. She sank onto the edge of her worn sofa, pulling Maya onto her lap. The fight went out of her, replaced by a wave of cold, desolate dread. "I can't," she whispered, her voice raw with despair. "I don't have family to call. My boss at the diner, he's not exactly understanding. I'll lose my job. We'll lose everything." Julian watched the raw vulnerability play out across her face. He had seen CEOs crumble under pressure, titans of industry brought low by a bad quarter. But this was different. This wasn't about profit or loss, it was about survival. And it moved him in a way a billion-dollar deal never could. His first instinct was, as always, tactical. He could buy the diner. He could fire the boss. He could deposit a sum of money into her account that would make her rent a rounding error. But he remembered the flash of defiance in her eyes when he'd offered money before. To do so now would be an act of aggression, not kindness. It would be another way of asserting power, of highlighting the chasm between their worlds. He needed a different solution, one that wasn't about money, but about environment. A place where rest was not a luxury, but a fact. "You won't lose anything," he said, the idea forming in his mind, as audacious as it was necessary. He looked at Dr. Finch. "She needs a place to recover, correct? A place with no distractions, where her health can be monitored." "Ideally, yes," Alistair agreed, seeing where Julian was heading. Julian turned his gaze back to Lena. He braced himself for the inevitable resistance. "I have a guest house. It's quiet. It's separate from the main house. You would have complete privacy. Mrs. Gable, my housekeeper, could prepare your meals. Dr. Finch could check on you daily. Maya could play in the garden." The offer landed in the small room and seemed to suck all the air out of it. Lena stared at him, her expression shifting from despair to disbelief, and then to a renewed, fiery suspicion. "A guest house?" she repeated, her voice dripping with incredulity. "You want me to move into your guest house? Like some stray you picked up off the street?" "That is not what I said," Julian replied, his voice even, though he felt a flicker of frustration. Why was this so difficult? He was offering a perfect logical solution.
"It's what you meant," she shot back, her pride flaring back to life. "I am not a charity case, Mr. Croft. I don't need to be rescued. We will manage. We always have. This isn't about managing," he said, his voice rising for the first time. The quiet control slipped, revealing the raw emotion underneath. "This is about you collapsing on the floor in front of your 7-year-old daughter. This is about not letting that happen again. What if she hadn't been able to call? What if I hadn't answered?" The words struck Lena harder than any insult. He was right. The image of Maya, alone and terrified, was a waking nightmare. She looked down at her daughter, who was watching them both with wide, anxious eyes, her small face a mirror of the tension in the room. In that moment, Lena's resistance wasn't just about her own pride anymore. It was about Maya's security. What was more important, her fierce, stubborn independence or her daughter's well-being? Was her pride worth risking her life, and in doing so, abandoning the one person who depended on her completely? The fight drained out of her, leaving her hollow. The tears she had been holding back finally came, silent and hot, tracing paths down her cheeks. She hated crying, hated showing weakness, especially in front of him. But she was so tired of being strong. "Please," Julian said, his voice softening again, sensing her surrender.
He felt like a brute, like he had backed a wounded animal into a corner. This isn't an act of charity. Consider it a debt. Your work on the concierge project years ago was invaluable. It made me a great deal of money. Let me repay a small part of that debt by ensuring you get the care you need. No strings attached. 1 week. That's all I'm asking. He had given her an out, a way to frame it that her pride could, just barely, accept. A professional arrangement, a debt repaid. It was a fiction, but it was a necessary one. Lena looked at Maya, then back at Julian's unreadable face. She felt trapped, cornered by circumstance and her own failing body. The thought of living under the roof of this powerful, enigmatic man was terrifying. But the thought of ending up in a hospital with Maya lost in the foster care system was infinitely worse. She took a shaky breath and gave a single defeated nod. "Okay," she whispered, the word tasting like ashes in her mouth. 1 week. The relief that washed over Julian was so profound it surprised him. He had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a terrifying commitment. The transition was a surreal blur. Within the hour, a discreet car, driven by a silent man named Thomas, was waiting outside. Julian had insisted they take only what they needed for the week, promising anything else they required would be provided. Lena packed a small bag with a numb, dreamlike efficiency. Clothes for her and Maya, a few of Maya's favorite books, and the one-eyed bear, Bartholomew. As she walked out of her apartment, she felt like she was leaving her own life behind. The drive to Julian's estate was a journey to another planet. They left the grit and noise of the city behind, climbing into the hills where the air grew cleaner and the houses grew larger, until they weren't houses anymore, but compounds, hidden behind towering gates and walls of cypress trees. When the gates to Julian's property slid silently open, Maya gasped. "Mama, it's a castle," she whispered, her face pressed against the window. It did look like a castle, a cold, modern one made of glass and steel and stone, but a castle nonetheless. It was beautiful, but it was a severe, intimidating beauty. It wasn't a home, it was a statement. The guest house was set apart from the main house, connected by a stone pathway that wound through a garden that was more like a sculpture park. It was larger than their entire apartment, a sleek, minimalist space with vast windows overlooking a forest of birch trees. The furniture was all shades of gray and white, the surfaces clean and bare. There was a kitchen stocked with food, a living area with a fireplace that lit with the press of a button, and 2 serene, quiet bedrooms. It was luxurious. It was sterile. It was the loneliest place Lena had ever seen. Mrs. Gable, a stern-looking woman with her gray hair in a tight bun, showed them in. She spoke in hushed, efficient tones, explaining where everything was, her presence adding to the feeling that this was not a home, but an institution. "Mr. Croft asked me to inform you that he will not disturb you," she said, her hands clasped in front of her. "Your meals will be delivered at 8, 12, and 7. Dr. Finch will visit tomorrow morning. If you require anything, there is an intercom." And then she was gone, leaving Lena and Maya alone in the echoing silence. Maya, however, was not intimidated. She immediately ran to the enormous window, her small hands making prints on the spotless glass. "Look, Mama, a bluebird!" she whispered, her face pressed against the window. It did look like a castle, a cold, modern one made of glass and steel and stone, but a castle nonetheless. It was beautiful, but it was a severe, intimidating beauty. It wasn't a home, it was a statement. The guest house was set apart from the main house, connected by a stone pathway that wound through a garden that was more like a sculpture park. It was larger than their entire apartment, a sleek, minimalist space with vast windows overlooking a forest of birch trees. The furniture was all shades of gray and white, the surfaces clean and bare. There was a kitchen stocked with food, a living area with a fireplace that lit with the press of a button, and 2 serene, quiet bedrooms. It was luxurious. It was sterile. It was the loneliest place Lena had ever seen. Mrs. Gable, a stern-looking woman with her gray hair in a tight bun, showed them in. She spoke in hushed, efficient tones, explaining where everything was, her presence adding to the feeling that this was not a home, but an institution. "Mr. Croft asked me to inform you that he will not disturb you," she said, her hands clasped in front of her. "Your meals will be delivered at 8, 12, and 7. Dr. Finch will visit tomorrow morning. If you require anything, there is an intercom." And then she was gone, leaving Lena and Maya alone in the echoing silence. Maya, however, was not intimidated. She immediately ran to the enormous window, her small hands making prints on the spotless glass. "Look, Mama, a bluebird!"
Lena watched her, a lump forming in her throat. She had done this for Maya. She had to remember that. She had swallowed her pride and accepted the help of a stranger for her daughter. But as she sank into the plush gray sofa, the sheer, oppressive quiet of the place felt like a weight on her chest. They were safe, they were cared for, and they were utterly, completely out of their element. Later that evening, after a meal of roasted chicken and vegetables that had appeared silently on a tray outside their door, Lena tucked Maya into a bed that was bigger than her own. "Is that man, Mr. Julian, a king?" Maya asked, her eyes wide with the day's strange events. "No, baby," Lena said, smoothing her hair. "He's just a man." "He has sad eyes," Maya said, her voice growing sleepy, "like the sun in my drawing." The observation, so simple and so astute, struck Lena. She hadn't thought of it that way. She had seen power, control, arrogance. Maya had seen sadness. After Maya was asleep, Lena couldn't rest. The silence of the guest house was too loud. She felt like a prisoner in a 5-star jail. She wandered into the living area and stood before the great window, looking out at the darkened woods. A light was on in the main house, a single, solitary window glowing in the distance. She could just make out a figure standing there, looking out, just as she was. Julian. He was in his fortress, and she was in hers. A few hundred yards of manicured lawn separated them, but it might as well have been an ocean. They were bound together by a child's desperate phone call, reluctant allies in a situation neither of them wanted. He was her reluctant savior, and she was his unwelcome responsibility. And for the next week, they were trapped here, together, in this beautiful, lonely place, forced to confront the ghosts that haunted them both. The first few days in the guest house passed in a slow, surreal rhythm. For Lena, it was a torment of stillness. She was used to constant motion, to the hum of the city, the clatter of dishes, the endless to-do list that propelled her through her days. Here there was only silence, broken by the chirping of birds and the quiet hum of the air conditioning. It was a silence that gave her too much time to think, to worry, to feel the full weight of her helplessness. Dr. Finch visited each morning, his calm presence a small anchor in the sea of her anxiety. He confirmed his initial diagnosis. She was suffering from a combination of severe exhaustion and chronic malnourishment that had led to cardiac arrhythmia. The rest was non-negotiable. He adjusted her diet, prescribed vitamins, and ordered her to do nothing more strenuous than walk to the kitchen. Maya, on the other hand, treated the estate as a magical new kingdom. After years of living in a cramped apartment where the only green space was a patch of weeds behind the building, the vast manicured lawns were a paradise. She discovered a small hidden fountain, chased butterflies through beds of white roses, and lay on the grass, finding shapes in the clouds. Her laughter, clear and bright, would sometimes drift from the garden, a sound of pure joy in a place that seemed to have forgotten what joy sounded like. Julian kept his word. He did not disturb them. Lena caught glimpses of him, a distant figure moving behind the glass walls of the main house, or the flash of his black SUV disappearing down the long driveway in the mornings. He was a ghost in his own home, a presence she felt more than saw.
Yet his influence was everywhere, in the perfectly prepared meals that appeared outside their door, in the new set of high-end watercolors and paper that was delivered for Maya one afternoon, in the quiet, unobtrusive way all their needs were met before she could even articulate them. It was a strange, disembodied kindness, and it made her more uneasy than his presence would have. The turning point came on the fourth day. Lena was feeling stronger, the persistent dizziness finally beginning to recede. She was sitting on the patio, watching Maya draw at a small outdoor table. Maya was humming to herself, a jumble of crayon sticks scattered around her. "What are you drawing, Sweet Pea?" Lena asked. "It's a family," Maya announced, holding up the paper. She had drawn 3 figures: a tall man with scribbled black hair, a woman with a big smile, and a little girl holding both their hands. Underneath, she had written their names in her wobbly 7-year-old script: Julian, Mama, Maya. Lena's heart clenched. It was the innocent, hopeful fantasy of a child who had never known a father, who had just been pulled from a crisis by a mysterious, powerful man. But seeing it there, in bright, waxy color, felt like a betrayal. "Honey, Mr. Croft is just being kind to us. We're not his family," she said gently, trying to manage her daughter's expectations. "I know," Maya said, with the simple logic of a child, "but we could be. He's sad. He needs a family to make his son smile again."
Before Lena could respond, a voice startled them both. "Her use of color is remarkable." They both looked up. Julian was standing at the edge of the patio, holding a small leather-bound book. He must have walked up from the garden, his footsteps silent on the grass. It was the first time they had been this close in days. He was dressed not in a suit, but in simple gray trousers and a black cashmere sweater. Without the armor of his corporate attire, he looked younger. And Maya was right. The sadness in his eyes was profound. Lena felt a flush of embarrassment, quickly hiding Maya's drawing under a book. "Mr. Croft, we didn't expect to see you." "This is my home, Miss James," he said, though there was no rebuke in his voice. He looked at Maya. "I hope my garden meets with your approval." "It has a secret fountain," Maya said, her shyness with him beginning to evaporate. "But it doesn't have any fish." A flicker of something, a ghost of a smile, touched Julian's lips. "That is a serious oversight. I'll have to rectify that." He glanced at the drawing Lena was still trying to hide. "May I?" Reluctantly, Lena slid the paper out. Julian took it, his long fingers gentle on the page. He stared at it for a long time, his expression unreadable. He wasn't looking at the figures of himself or Lena. His gaze was fixed on the small girl in the center, on the way Maya had drawn her bright red dress and 2 small pigtails. His breath hitched, a small, almost inaudible sound. His knuckles, where he gripped the paper, were white. Lena saw a wave of pain wash over his face, so raw and so deep it was like looking at an open wound. He seemed to forget they were there, lost in a memory that was clearly agonizing. "Mr. Croft?" Lena asked, her voice soft with concern. "Are you all right?" He blinked, coming back to himself. He looked disoriented, like a man waking from a dream. He carefully placed the drawing back on the table. "She's very talented," he said, his voice strained. He turned and walked away without another word, disappearing back toward the main house, leaving the leather-bound book behind on the patio table. Lena and Maya watched him go. "Did I make him sadder?" Maya asked, her lip trembling. "No, baby, I don't think so," Lena said, though she wasn't sure. She picked up the book he'd left. It wasn't a book, it was a photo album. Her hands trembling slightly, she opened it. The first picture was of a woman with a radiant smile and laughter in her eyes, her arm linked with a much younger, happier Julian. They were standing on a beach, the wind whipping their hair. The next few pages were filled with wedding photos, trips, moments of pure, unadulterated joy. This was the woman from his past, Amelia. And then Lena's breath caught in her throat. The pictures changed. They were of a little girl. A little girl with her father's dark hair and her mother's bright eyes, often dressed in a favorite red dress, her hair in 2 small pigtails. Her name was Lily.
Lena flipped through the pages, her heart aching. Lily at her first birthday, covered in cake. Lily riding a pony. Lily holding up a crayon drawing of a lopsided, frowning sun, almost identical to the one Maya had drawn. And then, on the last page, there was a single professional photograph. It was a family portrait. Julian, Amelia, and Lily, all of them smiling, a perfect, happy family. Underneath, a small brass plate read, "The Croft Family, 2018, 5 years ago." Lena finally understood. The sadness in his eyes, the echoing silence of the house, the way he had looked at Maya's drawing. He wasn't just a lonely billionaire. He was a man hollowed out by grief. He had lost everything: his wife, his child. She closed the album, her hands shaking. This man wasn't a threat. He was a ghost, just like her. He was haunted by the past just as she was haunted by the fear of her own. She had run from a man who threatened to destroy her future. He was trapped by a past that had already destroyed his. Later that day, driven by an impulse she didn't fully understand, Lena decided to bake. The guesthouse kitchen was a chef's dream, full of gleaming, unused appliances. She found flour, sugar, eggs, and chocolate chips. The simple, familiar act of measuring, mixing, and kneading was grounding. It was something she could control. Soon, the sterile guest house was filled with the warm, sweet scent of chocolate chip cookies, a smell of home, of comfort, of love. When the cookies were done, she arranged a half-dozen on a plate. She looked at the main house, at the single light that had just come on in the window as dusk began to fall. Her heart hammered in her chest. This was a boundary, and she was about to cross it. "Stay here and be good, sweet pea," she told Maya, who was watching a movie on the tablet Julian had provided. "I'll be right back." Carrying the plate of cookies, Lena walked the stone path to the main house. She felt like an intruder, a trespasser. But she kept walking. She knocked on the massive glass door. After a long moment, Julian opened it. He looked surprised to see her, his expression guarded. "Miss James," he said. "Lena," she corrected him softly. "My name is Lena." She held out the plate. "We baked these. Maya wanted to thank you for the watercolors. I wanted to thank you for everything." He stared at the plate of cookies as if it were a foreign object. It was such a simple, normal gesture, and in this house it was utterly alien. He looked from the cookies to her face, and for the first time his guard seemed to fall away completely. He saw not an employee, not a charity case, but a woman offering a simple human connection. He stepped aside. "Come in," he said, his voice quiet. A shared story of pain can often build a bridge stronger than any happy memory. Do you think it's our past wounds or our future hopes that truly connect us to others? It's a complex question about what lies at the heart of human bonding. Let me know your perspective in the comments below. She walked into the great, echoing hall of his house. It was even more intimidating from the inside. It was a museum, not a home. Bare walls, polished floors, art that was famous and cold. She followed him into a vast living area, the same one she had seen from her window. He gestured to a severe-looking leather sofa. "Please," he said. She sat, placing the plate of cookies on the glass table between them. The silence was awkward, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was filled with unspoken things, with the ghost of his family and the new, fragile reality of hers. "I saw the album," she said quietly, deciding that pretending would be an insult. "You left it on the patio. I'm so sorry, Julian." Using his first name felt both natural and terrifying. He didn't flinch. He just sat there, his hands clasped, and stared into the empty black fireplace. "It was her birthday yesterday," he said, his voice low and raspy, as if the words were being torn from his throat. Lily. She would have been 12. And then the story came out. Not all at once, but in broken fragments. He spoke of the accident, a rainy night, a drunk driver who ran a red light. He had been in London on business. The call had come at 4 a.m. He spoke of the aftermath, the crushing silence, the way he had stripped the house of their things, thinking it would help. He spoke of the guilt, the relentless gnawing guilt of a husband and father who hadn't been there to protect his family. "I built this empire," he said, his voice hollow with self-loathing. "I can control markets, move mountains of capital, bend governments to my will. But I couldn't stop one car from running a red light. I couldn't save them." Lena listened, her heart breaking for him. When he was done, she didn't offer platitudes. She didn't say, "They're in a better place," or "Time heals all wounds." She knew how empty those words were. Instead, she shared a piece of her own brokenness. "I know about running," she said, her own voice quiet but steady. "Maya's father, he wasn't a good man. He had a temper, and hands that were too quick." She took a deep breath. "The night I left, I had a broken rib and a black eye. I had $26 in my pocket and a 6-month-old baby in a car seat. I ran for my life and for hers. And for years, every time a car slowed down beside me, every time the phone rang from an unknown number, I felt that same terror, the fear that the past was coming back to claim me." They sat in the quiet, two survivors from different wars, sharing their scars in the sterile silence of his mausoleum. His was a grief of sudden, catastrophic loss. Hers was a grief of slow, grinding fear and survival. But it was the same language of pain. "That's why you're so fiercely independent," he said, a look of understanding dawning in his eyes. "Why you wouldn't let me help." "It's all I've ever had," she admitted. "Trusting someone else, it's not easy for me." He looked at her, his gaze holding hers. The sadness was still there, but it was joined by something else, a flicker of warmth, of connection. The plate of cookies sat between them, a simple, sweet offering that had breached the walls of two very different, very lonely fortresses. The guest house and the main house were no longer two separate prisons. They were just two rooms, occupied by two people who were beginning to realize they weren't as alone as they thought. The plate of cookies changed everything. It was an armistice, a silent agreement to lower their defenses. The invisible wall between the main house and the guest house dissolved. The next morning, there was no tray left silently outside the door. Instead, there was a soft knock. When Lena opened it, Julian was standing there, holding a small carton of eggs and a bag of pancake mix. He looked awkward, unsure. It was a look she never would have associated with him.
He stammered, a man who commanded boardrooms now fumbling for words in front of a simple door. "Maya mentioned your pancakes are superior. I thought perhaps a demonstration was in order." Lena couldn't help but smile, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Are you trying to steal my secret recipe, Mr. Croft?" "Julian," he corrected her gently. "And yes, that's my primary motive, industrial espionage." The joke, clumsy as it was, hung in the air for a moment before they both let out a quiet laugh. The sound of it felt revolutionary in the quiet morning air. Lena stepped aside. "Well, come on in, Julian, but I warn you, the recipe is a closely guarded family secret." What followed was a morning of startling, simple domesticity. Maya, thrilled at this new development, appointed herself head supervisor. Julian, it turned out, was completely, hopelessly inept in a kitchen. He tried to flip a pancake and sent it sliding across the counter. He got batter on his nose. He looked so utterly out of his element, so endearingly clumsy, that Lena found herself laughing freely, a sound she hadn't made in years. Julian, instead of being embarrassed by his incompetence, seemed to revel in it. He let Maya show him how to hold the spatula. He listened with feigned seriousness as she explained the critical importance of chocolate chips. For the first time since she had met him, the deep sadness in his eyes was replaced by a soft, gentle light. He was looking at Maya with a hunger that Lena recognized instantly, the longing for a connection that had been stolen from him. They ate at the small kitchen table in the guest house, the three of them. The sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the flour dust that still lingered in the air.
The pancakes were a little burnt, the coffee a little too strong, but it was the best meal Lena had eaten in a decade. It felt real. It felt like a family. This morning set a new precedent. The forced proximity of the estate was no longer a prison sentence. It was becoming an opportunity. Julian started spending his afternoons with them. He never pushed, never intruded. He would simply appear in the garden while Maya was playing, and she would inevitably draw him into her world. He learned the names of all her stuffed animals. He was formally introduced to Bartholomew, the one-eyed bear, and treated him with the solemn respect Maya felt he deserved. He pushed her on a swing he'd had installed overnight, his movements careful, almost reverent. He listened, truly listened, as she chattered on about school, about her friends, about the color of the sky. He was rediscovering the lost language of childhood, and it was healing him in ways he hadn't thought possible. One afternoon, as Lena watched them from the patio, Julian looked up and caught her eye. He was on his hands and knees in the grass, helping Maya build a fairy house out of twigs and leaves. He had a smudge of dirt on his cheek and a wildflower tucked behind his ear, put there by Maya. The formidable billionaire, the titan of industry, looked like a man who had finally come home. That evening, after Maya was asleep, he found Lena on the patio, wrapped in a blanket, looking up at the stars. "You're good with her," she said softly, not looking at him. "She's easy to be good with," he replied, his voice quiet. He sat in the chair opposite her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "She has your light." "She has her own," Lena corrected gently. "I just try not to stand in its way." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, a silence that wasn't empty, but full of the day's shared moments. "I cleared my schedule for the week," he said suddenly. "My COO thinks I've finally lost my mind. He might be right." "Why did you do it?" Lena asked, finally turning to look at him. He met her gaze, his eyes dark and serious in the twilight. "Because, for the first time in 5 years, I didn't want to be at the office. I wanted to be here. Helping a 7-year-old build a fairy house seemed infinitely more important than acquiring a German tech firm." The admission was so raw, so vulnerable, it made Lena's heart ache. She saw the man he must have been before the grief had entombed him, a man capable of immense love and gentleness. "Tell me about her," Lena said, her voice a near whisper. "Tell me about Lily." He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. He never spoke her name. He hadn't said it aloud to another person since the funeral. But looking at Lena, at her compassionate, understanding eyes, he found that he could. So he did. He talked about Lily. He told Lena how she used to steal his reading glasses and wear them, pretending to be a serious businesswoman. He described the way she smelled after a bath, like lavender and sunshine. He recounted her terrible off-key singing, which she performed with the confidence of a rock star. He spoke of her fierce love for animals and her equally fierce hatred of broccoli.
As he spoke, the memories, once so painful they were like shards of glass in his soul, began to soften. Sharing them didn't erase the pain, but it eased the loneliness of it. He was giving them to Lena, and she was holding them with a gentle, reverent care. Lena, in turn, found herself opening up in ways she never had before. She told him about her dreams of one day opening her own small bakery, a dream she had long since packed away as a childish fantasy. She described the cakes and pastries she would make, her voice full of a passion he had never heard from her. "You should do it," he said simply, "when you're better." "It's not that simple, Julian," she said with a sad smile. "Dreams cost money. And courage." "I can supply the first," he said, "and I think you have more of the second than anyone I've ever met." His belief in her was a gift, more valuable than any check he could write. It was a vote of confidence in a future she had stopped believing in for herself. The week passed like a dream. It was a fragile, perfect bubble of time, removed from the harsh realities of their lives. They were a strange, makeshift family, finding solace and healing in the quiet spaces of the estate.
The guest house was no longer a sterile box. It was filled with the scent of Lena's cooking and the sound of Maya's laughter. The main house was no longer a mausoleum. It was a place Julian was starting to see as a potential home again. On the last night, the night before Lena was scheduled to return to her old life, a storm rolled in. The rain came down in sheets, lashing against the great windows of the guest house. The power flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Maya, who was afraid of thunderstorms, let out a small cry. In an instant, Julian was there, his phone's flashlight cutting through the gloom. He had come from the main house the moment the lights went out. "It's all right," he said, his voice a calm rumble in the dark. "It's just a storm." He found candles, and soon the guest house was filled with a soft, flickering glow. The three of them sat huddled together on the sofa, wrapped in blankets. The storm raged outside, but inside their small bubble of candlelight, it was peaceful, safe. To distract Maya, Julian began to tell her a story. It was a story he made up on the spot, about a brave little bear named Bartholomew who went on an adventure to find a smiling son for his sad king. Lena listened, her head resting on the back of the sofa, watching his face in the candlelight. His features, usually so stern and controlled, were softened, animated. He was a natural storyteller. As the story wound down, Maya's head began to nod, her eyes drifting shut. She fell asleep there, curled between Julian and Lena, her small hand resting on Julian's arm. Neither of them moved. They sat in the warm, candle-lit silence, listening to the rain and the soft sound of Maya's breathing. Lena looked at Julian, at the way he was gazing down at her daughter, his expression one of pure, unadulterated tenderness. A powerful, overwhelming emotion welled up in her chest. It was a feeling she had long since buried, a feeling she never thought she would experience again. Her hand, as if of its own accord, reached out and covered his. Their fingers intertwined. It wasn't a gesture of passion, but of something deeper. It was a gesture of profound, heartbreaking intimacy, of shared grief, of shared healing, of a fragile, impossible hope. Julian looked up from Maya, his eyes meeting Lena's. In the flickering candlelight, he saw everything. He saw her strength, her vulnerability, her fierce, protective love. And he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he didn't want this to end. He didn't want to go back to his empty house, to his silent life. He wanted this warmth, this connection, this woman, this child. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. He pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative. It was a question, not a demand. It tasted of rain and salt, and a sorrow so deep it had become a part of them. But underneath it there was a spark, a promise of a new beginning, of a love found in the most unexpected of places. The bubble was perfect. It was safe. It was real. And it was about to shatter. The morning after the storm was deceptively beautiful. The air was washed clean, the sunlight sparkled on the wet leaves, and the world seemed fresh and new. The fragile intimacy of the night before lingered between Lena and Julian, a warm, unspoken promise. They shared breakfast in the guest house, the conversation easy, punctuated by shared glances that held a new, deeper meaning. The future, which had been a terrifying void for both of them, suddenly seemed to hold a glimmer of possibility. The bubble burst at 10:02 a.m.
It didn't burst with a bang, but with the quiet, malevolent buzz of Julian's phone. He was on the patio, watching Maya chase a squirrel, when he glanced at the screen. It was a notification from Evelyn, his hyper-vigilant assistant. The subject line contained a single, ominous word: urgent. He opened the link. The headline screamed at him from the screen of a notorious online tabloid, a vulture of a publication known for its vicious, career-ending takedowns. Grieving billionaire Julian Croft preyed upon by cunning single mother. Insiders reveal shocking tale of manipulation and deceit. Julian's blood ran cold. The article was a masterpiece of character assassination, a tapestry woven from half-truths, malicious speculation, and cruel innuendo. It painted Lena as a conniving gold digger, a down-on-her-luck waitress who had cynically exploited the anniversary of his family's death to entrap him. It mentioned the mysterious emergency call, twisting Maya's terror into a calculated ploy. It quoted an anonymous source close to the Croft household. He knew instantly it was a recently fired gardener with a grudge, who described Lena as a scheming presence who had wormed her way into the reclusive tycoon's life. The article included grainy, long-lens photographs of them in the garden. A shot of Julian pushing Maya on the swing was framed as him being paraded like a prize. A photo of him and Lena talking on the patio was captioned, "The seductress closes her trap." Every innocent moment of their shared healing was twisted into something ugly and transactional. It was poison, pure and simple. He felt a surge of white-hot rage, followed by a wave of nauseating dread. He looked up at Lena, who was walking towards him, a hopeful smile on her face. The smile died when she saw his expression. "Julian, what is it? What's wrong?" He couldn't speak. He just handed her the phone. She read the headline, her face draining of all color. She swayed slightly, as if she'd been struck. Her hand flew to her mouth, and she began to read, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The words were a physical assault. Gold digger, schemer, predator. They were branding her, reducing her entire life, her struggles, her love for her daughter, to a cheap, ugly caricature. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, this can't be real." But it was. The public humiliation was excruciating, a violation that felt worse than any physical blow. They had taken the most fragile, beautiful thing that had happened to her in years and smeared it with filth for public consumption. But then her horror turned to ice-cold terror. Deep in the article, designed for maximum damage, was a detail that made her heart stop. It mentioned that she had fled an unnamed eastern state years ago with her daughter after a tumultuous relationship. And then it named him. Sources say the father, a local contractor named Rick Slater, has been searching for his daughter for years. Rick. The name was a key, turning a lock in a dark room she had kept sealed for 7 years. Rick, with his charming smile that could turn to cold fury in an instant. Rick, whose love was a cage, whose jealousy was a weapon. The man she had run from in the dead of night. She had changed her name, moved across the country, lived in fear, all to keep Maya safe from him. And now this article, this vicious, careless story, had just handed him a map. "He'll find us," she breathed, the phone slipping from her numb fingers and clattering onto the stone patio. "Oh God, Julian, he'll find us." Julian, who had been reeling from the invasion of his own privacy, was now confronted with a far more immediate and dangerous reality. "I'll handle it, Lena," he said, his voice a low growl. The protector in him, the one that had been dormant for so long, was now fully awake and roaring. "I'll crush this publication. I'll get a restraining order. He won't get near you." But Lena wasn't listening. She was looking at him, and the hope, the warmth, the connection that had blossomed between them was gone. In its place was a look of pure, unadulterated horror. She wasn't just seeing Rick, she was seeing the chaos that Julian's world, his wealth, his fame, had brought down upon her. "This is because of you," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and accusation. "This life, the photographers, the reporters, the lies, this is your world, not mine. I can't live in it. I can't let Maya live in it." "Lena, that's not fair," he began, but she cut him off. "Isn't it?" she cried, her voice cracking. "I was safe in my obscurity. We were struggling, yes, but we were safe. I brought my daughter here into your life, and I put a
target on her back. I led him right to us. The guilt was a tidal wave drowning her. She had been so careful for so long, and in 1 week, in a haze of emotional vulnerability and impossible hope, she had undone it all.
She had traded her daughter's safety for a fairy tale. "What have I done?" she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. Just then, her own phone, lying on the patio table, began to ring. It was an unknown number. Her blood turned to ice. She knew, with a certainty that defied logic, who it was. Her hand shaking, she answered it. "Well, well, well," a familiar, chillingly casual voice drawled from the other end. "Look at you, Lena, or should I say, Miss James, trading up in the world, a real billionaire. I always knew you were ambitious." It was Rick. How did you get this number?" she stammered. "The internet is a wonderful thing," he sneered, "especially when reporters are paying top dollar for information. They found me, paid me for a few juicy quotes. A little bonus was your new number. So tell me, how's my little girl? How's Maya?" Hearing him say Maya's name was like a physical violation. "You stay away from her," Lena hissed, her voice dripping with a venom she didn't know she possessed. "You stay away from us." "Oh, I don't think so," he said, his voice losing its casual tone and taking on a hard, ugly edge. "See, the way I see it, you owe me. 7 years. That's a lot of lost time, a lot of child support you never got. Or you could make it all go away. That billionaire boyfriend of yours, he looks like he has deep pockets. $50,000, a small price to pay for your little secret to stay buried, and for me to forget I ever had a daughter." Blackmail. It was so much worse than she could have imagined. "You're disgusting," she spat. "I'm practical," he shot back. "You have 24 hours to get me the money. If I don't hear from you, I'm going to the press with a whole new story. A story about a loving father whose mentally unstable ex kidnapped his child. A story about all the bruises you accidentally got. I kept pictures, Lena. Think about how that will look. Think about who they'll give custody to then." The line went dead. Lena stood there, frozen, the phone clutched in her hand. The threat was catastrophic. Rick was a master manipulator. He could twist the truth, play the victim, and with the media already painting her as a villain, they would believe him. She could lose Maya. She looked at Julian, who had been watching her, his face a mask of fury and concern. And in that moment she made a devastating choice. The choice of a terrified mother trying to outrun a monster. She couldn't fight Rick and Julian's world. The battlefield was too public, the stakes too high. Her only option was the one she knew best: to run, to disappear. "It's over," she said, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion. She was building a wall around her heart, brick by painful brick. "Lena, listen to me. We can fight this," Julian pleaded, taking a step towards her. "No," she said, backing away from him as if he were on fire. "There is no we. There was never a we. This was a mistake, all of it. The weak, the kiss. It was a moment of weakness. I was grateful. You were lonely. That's all it was." The words were knives, and she was plunging them into both of them. She had to make him let her go. She had to sever the bond completely, because it was that very bond that was endangering them. "You don't mean that," he said, his voice hoarse with pain. He could see the terror in her eyes, but the words still hit him like a physical blow. "I do," she said, forcing herself to meet his gaze, her own eyes cold and hard.
I have to go. I have to get Maya and go, before he finds us, before your world completely destroys mine." She looked at him, her expression a mixture of desperate regret and fierce protective resolve. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Croft, but we're done here. I think it's best if you stay away from us now, for good." She turned and walked back into the guest house, her back straight, her shoulders rigid. She didn't look back. She couldn't. If she did, she knew she would shatter into a million pieces. Julian was left standing alone on the patio, the morning sun feeling like a cruel mockery. The warmth, the hope, the impossible, fragile connection, all of it was gone, incinerated in the fire of a tabloid headline and a ghost from the past. He was alone again, in his silent, empty world. But this time, the silence wasn't just an absence of sound. It was the deafening roar of loss. The silence that descended after Lena's departure was a living entity. It seeped into the pristine corners of the main house, clung to the furniture, and echoed in the vast, empty spaces. It was a silence Julian knew well, the one he had cultivated for 5 years as a shield against grief. But now it was different. It was no longer a shield. It was a cage. And it was filled with the ghosts of the last week, the sound of Maya's laughter in the garden, the scent of Lena's cookies in the kitchen, the memory of a soft, tentative kiss in the candlelight.
He stood in his living room, staring at the plate Lena had brought over. A single cookie remained. It looked like a relic from another civilization, a testament to a world of warmth and connection that had vanished as quickly as it had appeared. His first instinct was to retreat, to let the machine take over. The cold, logical part of his brain told him to let her go. She was right. He had brought chaos into her life. His world was toxic, a place where privacy was a commodity and vultures fed on human misery. The smart move, the safe move, was to cut his losses, write a large check to a private account for her, and erect his walls again, higher and stronger than before. He could go back to his life of calculated acquisitions and sterile solitude. He could forget her, but he couldn't. He walked through the silent house, every room a fresh torment. He passed the grand dining table where he had eaten alone for years and imagined the 3 of them sitting there, Maya chattering, Lena smiling at him over the rim of a coffee cup. He walked into his home office, a place of immense power, and saw only its impotence. He could bankrupt nations from this desk, but he couldn't protect the 2 people who had, in the space of a single week, become the center of his universe. Lena's words echoed in his mind. This was a mistake. There was never a we. He knew she was lying. He had seen the truth in her eyes in the moments before the storm hit. The lies were a shield, a desperate act of a terrified mother trying to protect her child. She was running, not from him, but from the monster he had inadvertently led to her door. He sank into the chair behind his desk, the weight of his choice pressing down on him. He could choose pride. He could accept her rejection, nurse his wounded heart, and retreat into the lonely safety of his fortune. He could tell himself he had done enough. Or he could choose vulnerability. He could choose to fight. For 5 years, he had used his power and wealth to build walls, to isolate himself, to numb the pain. He had become a master of defense. But Lena and Maya had breached those defenses. They hadn't just entered his home, they had cracked open his heart. And now he was faced with a stark realization. Power wasn't for building walls, it was for protecting what you love. What was the point of his empire if it couldn't provide a sanctuary for them? What was the point of his strength if he didn't use it to stand between them and the darkness? He looked at the single crayon drawing he had kept from the patio, the one Maya had made of their strange little family. He had smoothed it out and placed it on his desk. Julian, Mama, Maya. A child's simple, hopeful wish.
In that moment, the choice became clear. It was terrifying. It meant stepping out from behind his walls completely. It meant engaging with the messy, painful, unpredictable world of human emotion. It meant risking his heart, not on a business deal, but on a woman and a child. It was the biggest risk of his life. A quiet, ruthless efficiency took over him. This was not the cold calculus of a corporate takeover. This was the focused, burning intensity of a man with a singular purpose. He picked up his phone. He wasn't going to retreat. He was going to war. His first call was not to a lawyer, but to his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Gavriel. "Gavriel," he said, his voice deadly calm, "I have a situation. I'm sending you a name, Rick Slater. I want to know everything. Every skeleton in his closet, every unpaid debt, every shady deal. I want leverage. And I want a surveillance team on him. Now. He is not to get within 1,000 yards of Lena and Maya James. Use whatever resources you need." His second call was to Evelyn. "Evelyn, cancel my schedule for the foreseeable future, all of it, and get our chief legal counsel on the line. The tabloid that ran that story. I want to dismantle it. Not just sue them, I want to buy their parent company and shut them down. Find a way." He was using his immense power not as a cudgel, but as a scalpel, with precision and lethal intent. He would neutralize the threats. He would clear the battlefield. And then he would go find her. Lena drove with a single-minded, desperate focus. She had used the last of her cash to buy a beat-up, 20-year-old sedan from a seedy used car lot on the edge of the city. It smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. It was perfect. It was anonymous. Maya was asleep in the back seat, clutching Bartholomew the bear, exhausted by the sudden, confusing departure. Lena had told her they were going on an adventure, a lie that tasted like poison. Every time she looked at her daughter's sleeping face in the rearview mirror, a fresh wave of guilt washed over her.
She had taken her from a place of safety and laughter, from a man who pushed her on a swing and told her stories, and was now dragging her back into a life on the run. She drove for hours, heading east, back towards the past she had tried so hard to escape. Her plan was flimsy, born of panic. She would find a small, forgettable town, get a cash-in-hand job waitressing, and disappear again. It was the only way she knew how to survive. She finally stopped at a desolate, run-down motel off a lonely highway. The sign, with its flickering neon VACNC, looked like a beacon of despair. The room was grim. The carpet was stained. The air was thick with the smell of bleach, and the single bed sagged in the middle. It was a world away from the clean sheets and quiet luxury of Julian's guest house. As she tucked a sleeping Maya into the lumpy bed, the full weight of her decision crashed down on her. She had run from Julian to protect Maya from Rick. But what kind of life was she running towards? A life of fear, of poverty, of constantly looking over her shoulder? A life where Maya would have no stability, no security, no chance to just be a child. She saw the light fading from Maya's eyes even in her sleep. In the garden, she had been vibrant, carefree. Here, in this grim, transient room, she seemed to shrink. Lena had thought she was choosing the lesser of two evils, but now she wasn't so sure. She had run from the potential danger of Julian's world, only to plunge them back into the certain misery of hers. Was this strength, or was it fear disguised as strength? She sat on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands, and let out a single, ragged sob. She was so tired of running. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Her heart leaped into her throat, thinking it was Rick. With trembling hands, she read the message. It wasn't from Rick. It was from Julian. "He can't hurt you. I won't let him. I'm taking care of it, all of it. Don't run from me, Lena. Please, let me fight for you. Let me fight for us." The message was a lifeline. It was a plea, not a demand. It was a promise of a strength she could lean on, not run from. Tears streamed down her face. Tears of regret, of fear, but also of a tiny, flickering ember of hope. She had a choice to make. Not Julian, her. She could continue to run, to trust only in herself, to believe that love and connection were luxuries she couldn't afford. She could keep Maya safe in a prison of fear. Or she could take the biggest risk of her life. She could choose to trust, to believe that she was worthy of being fought for, to believe that Julian's love wasn't a threat, but a shield, to believe that together they could build a fortress stronger than any wall she could build on her own. She looked at her sleeping daughter, at the one-eyed bear clutched in her arms. She remembered Julian's story, of Bartholomew the bear on a quest to find a smiling son for his sad king. Her decision was made. With a hand that was surprisingly steady, she typed a reply. It was just one word: where? The response came almost instantly. It wasn't a set of directions or a demand to return. It was a single pinned location on a map. A small town in the middle of the state, a place called Havenwood. It was about 2 hours from her dingy motel room. Beneath the pin was a short message: "Meet me here, at the fountain in the town square. Sunrise." Lena stared at the screen, her heart a tumultuous mix of terror and hope. It wasn't a summons back to his world, to his mansion, to his life of glass walls and silent staff. It was a request to meet on neutral ground. A place called Havenwood. The name itself felt like a promise. She spent the rest of the night in a state of suspended animation, watching over Maya, her mind racing. Was she being a fool? Was she walking back into a world that would chew her up and spit her out? But then she would remember the quiet sincerity in his voice when he told her about Lily, the clumsy way he'd tried to make pancakes, the tender look on his face as he watched Maya sleep. This wasn't about his money or his power. It was about the man underneath it all, the one who had answered a child's desperate call. Before the sky began to pale, she gently woke Maya. "Time to go, sweet pea," she whispered. "Are we going on another adventure?" Maya asked, her voice thick with sleep. Lena looked at her daughter, at the innocent trust in her eyes, and decided, for the first time in a long time, to tell the truth. "I hope so, baby. I really hope so." The drive to Havenwood was a journey toward the dawn. The darkness of the night slowly gave way to the soft grays and purples of first light. As they got closer, the landscape changed. The lonely highways gave way to winding country roads, flanked by old-growth forests and sleepy farmhouses. Havenwood was like stepping into a postcard. It was a small, charming town with a main street lined with brick buildings, a bakery with a cheerful striped awning, and a town square with a beautiful old stone fountain at its center. It was quiet, peaceful, and felt a million miles away from the chaos of their lives. And begin? But when he turned, as if sensing her presence, the look in his eyes was anything but ordinary. It was filled with a raw, desperate hope. He didn't rush towards her, he just waited. He let her close the distance. She stopped a few feet from him, Maya clinging to her leg, suddenly shy. "Julian," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Lena," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. The silence that fell between them wasn't awkward or tense. It was a space for everything that had been left unsaid. "I was so scared," she finally admitted, the confession a release of the burden she had been carrying. "My first instinct is always to run, to protect her. It's all I know how to do." "I know," he said softly, "but you don't have to run anymore. I promised I would take care of it, and I have." He told her what he had done in the hours since she'd left. Gavriel's investigation into Rick had unearthed a history of fraud, tax evasion, and 2 other women he had blackmailed after relationships ended. The evidence was irrefutable. It had been presented to Rick Slater not by a lawyer, but by Gavriel himself, with a clear, non-negotiable offer: disappear completely and permanently, or face federal charges that would put him away for a very long time. Rick had chosen to disappear. "He will never bother you again," Julian said, the finality in his voice absolute. "As for the media, that will take longer.
But I've started a process that will ensure the people responsible for that story will not have the power to hurt anyone else again. I will shield you from all of it, I promise." Lena listened, stunned by the sheer, quiet efficiency with which he had dismantled the threats that had terrified her. He had used his power not to control, but to protect. He had built a fortress around them, not of walls, but of safety. "Why?" she asked, the question that had haunted her from the beginning. "Why would you do all of this for us?" He finally took a step closer, his eyes pleading with her to understand. Because when Maya called that day, she didn't just call a wrong number. She called a man who was already dead. A man hiding in an empty house, going through the motions of a life that had no meaning. "You and Maya, you brought me back to life. You filled my house with laughter. You filled my life with light. You showed me what it was to feel again." He looked down at Maya, who was peeking out from behind Lena's legs. "You are not a charity case, Lena. You are not a stray I picked up. You and your daughter are the most valuable thing that has ever happened to me. And I was a fool to think I could just let you walk away." He reached out, not to touch her, but holding his hand open in the space between them. A choice. "I don't want to be your savior," he said, his voice cracking with vulnerability. "I want to be your partner. I don't want you to be a guest in my house. I want you to make it our home." "I know, I'm not. I'm broken, Lena. And I know you have your own scars. But maybe two broken people can piece each other back together and make something whole." Tears were streaming down Lena's face, but for the first time, they were not tears of fear or sorrow. They were tears of overwhelming, heartbreaking relief. He wasn't offering her security. He wasn't offering her his fortune. He was offering her his heart. She stepped forward and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, a perfect fit. "He has sad eyes," Maya said, her small voice cutting through the emotional intensity of the moment. Both adults looked down at her. She was looking up at Julian. But not anymore. A genuine, unburdened laugh escaped Julian's lips. He knelt, bringing himself down to her level. "That's because of you, Maya, and your mom. You made my son smile again." Maya, finally convinced, let go of her mother's leg and launched herself into Julian's arms. He caught her, holding her tightly, burying his face in her hair, just as Lena had done in that moment of terror in their apartment. He held on to her as if he was holding on to life itself. Lena watched them, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long was finally gone, replaced by a feeling she had never dared to dream of: peace.
After a long moment, Julian stood up, still holding Maya's hand. He looked at Lena. "I have one more thing to show you," he said. He led them across the town square to one of the brick buildings on Main Street. The windows were covered with paper, but there was a "For Lease" sign in the window with a big red "Leased" banner slapped across it. "What is this?" Lena asked. Julian handed her a key. "It's yours," he said. "I called the owner this morning. The lease is paid for 5 years. It's a bakery, or it will be if you still want it." Lena stared at him, speechless. It wasn't a gift to indebt her. It was a gift of freedom. It was his way of telling her that he didn't want to own her or control her. He wanted to empower her. He wanted her to have her own dreams, her own space, her own life, right alongside his. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The space was empty, filled with dust motes dancing in the morning light. But she could see it all. The display cases filled with pastries, the ovens in the back, the small tables where people would sit and talk. She could smell the sugar and cinnamon already. It was the future she had never let herself imagine. She turned to him, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered. It was an inadequate word for the magnitude of what he had done. "Don't thank me," he said, his voice full of love. "Just let me have a cookie every now and then." He was standing in the doorway, the morning sun at his back, creating a silhouette. It was the same image from the day they met, a powerful man appearing in a doorway.
But this time, he wasn't an intruder from another world. He was her partner, her future. He was home. And this time, they were all on the same side of the threshold, ready to walk through it together. This story began with a cry for help and ended with the creation of a new family, proving that sometimes our most desperate moments can lead to our greatest blessings. What do you think is the single most important ingredient for turning an unexpected connection into a lasting love? Share your wisdom in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories that touch the heart. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.